Good morning. You're doing well. Hope you're ready for Christmas. I'm not. Jesus is the reason for the season, right? And you guys have heard that before. And it's a great sentiment. It's a really good idea to keep Christ in Christmas, right? And it rightly shines a light on Jesus. But I'm going to say something in a second that is going to challenge the accuracy of that statement, okay? But before I do, I want to be clear. If you have a bumper sticker on your car that says that, leave it on, okay? If you have an ornament on your tree, this is on our tree at home. I took the picture this morning. I'm not asking you to take it down. I'm not taking mine down, okay? That's just not how it works, okay? We're leaving it on the tree, okay? But according to the writers of the New Testament, and according to the words of Jesus that the writers of the New Testament recorded, it could be argued this way. You are the reason for the season. That really think about that for a second. That you are the reason God so loved the world, okay? This is what Jesus said, that he made Christmas happen for you. Does it make sense? Why did he do that? Because we're so messed up. That's why. We're so messed up. So if you think about people who are messed up, you could maybe say, I don't know, if you're having trouble at work, your boss is the reason for the season, right? Or maybe your mother-in-law is the reason for the season. No, I wouldn't say that. Any of that stuff, okay? But the idea is that we are the reason for the season because we're so messed up. And we're all familiar. Put yourself in my shoes. I got to talk about Christmas every year. It's the same story, right? And we're all familiar with the story. And there's a lot of mythology mixed into the Christmas things. Like, for instance, I hate to break the news. Where's our drummer, Chooch? There was no little drummer boy, okay? Okay, I mean, come on. That's just not in the story, okay? So there's mythology mixed into it, but we all know the basic themes, right? There's this mysterious pregnancy. There's no room in the inn. There's a manger. There's a star, there's a shepherd, the wise men, all that stuff, right? We know all that stuff. But you may not know much about the backstory of the Christmas event, okay? And I think it's important to know the backstory if we're going to understand the story of Christmas. The backstory started thousands of years before there was a Bethlehem, okay? And the author of the book of Genesis means origins, okay? Recorded the first mention of the reason for the season. The story begins in the first 3 chapters of the book. The first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis are not a science lesson. That's not what they are, okay? But they communicate to us super important principles that we need to understand about the world that we live in, okay? The first couple chapters, okay, what do they talk about? They talk about how God spun up the place, okay? That he made the place. And I'm not going to argue the way he did that, okay? But the important thing is he is the origin. He is the one that spun it all up. And it says in the first 2 chapters that it was all really good. Everything was really great. Life just went on and on and on. Everything was good. And it uniquely talks about human beings. That human beings are uniquely made, okay? It is so true if you think about the world we live in. Is there anybody like us? Look at all these lights. Look at that image. Look at all this stuff around us. Monkeys don't make this, right? Who makes this stuff? Well, it talks about that we're given certain godlike capabilities to create, to imagine, all this stuff, to analyze our existence. And all that's described in the first 2 chapters of the book. And then comes chapter 3, okay? I call that first 2 chapters, I think of it as the upward spiral of life and human potential. It's so true, okay? And then comes the downward spiral in chapter 3. It's a life-sucking spiral. It sucks the life out of you, and it destroys you. And things are really messed up. And it talks about that in chapter 3. It talks about human limitation and misery. The upward spiral of life and human potential coexists with the downward spiral. Do you get that? Have you experienced cruddy stuff in your life? Yes. Have you? Yeah. Have you experienced beautiful things in your life? Okay, they're both true. And it's just, they coexist. And some of us, we don't look in mirrors anymore because the downward spiral brings decay. I mean, who is that looking back at you, right? You know, I mean, but look around. These forces are in us, they're in the world, and they're in us. Okay, we all have that stuff. And so chapter 3 is mostly about the bad news. And even though it got messed up, God still loved the world, okay, and made a promise to do something about it. And that first promise talked about a child that was going to be born to come and fix what was wrong in the world. God promises that the first time in chapter 3 of the book of Genesis, okay, that someone is going to come with the assignment and the ability to destroy the downward spiral. Genesis 3:15 talks about this. It says this. Now, you remember the story that the snake started talking to the woman, talked about the fruit and all that kind of stuff. Don't get lost in the idea of the snake. The snake is the personification of evil. It talks about a very important principle that you need to understand. Okay, and she succumbed to the temptation, and then he succumbed to the temptation, and then it created divisions between God and between each other. He blamed her, and then he said, the woman, she gave it to me, and by the way, you gave me the woman. Right? Shame enters in and all this stuff. But then God says to the snake, the personification of evil, he says, I'm going to put hatred between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. There's going to be someone that's going to come from the woman that's going to crush your head. It's going to destroy you, give you a fatal blow, even though you're going to wound this child that gets born with a non-fatal injury. Christmas, Good Friday, and Easter are all wrapped up in that idea. Do you follow that? Okay. And here's the thing. God was really serious about this, okay, even though it didn't always seem like it. And even today, it doesn't always seem like it. Doesn't it feel like the evil side is going to win sometimes? Am I the only one? Okay, it does. It feels that way. That's what life in this world is like. But, and see, for these ancients, this promised child didn't come for a really long time. Didn't happen for a really long time. So what I'm going to do this morning, hopefully we get out of here by, 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. I'm going to try to give you an overview of the whole Old Testament. Strap it on? Okay, let's do it, okay? So the story progresses. Chapter 4 of Genesis. Cain murders his brother Abel over a religious dispute. Wow. You know, the only thing worse than people sometimes are religious people. Amen? Okay? The church would be so great if it wasn't for who? Us. Because we're so messed up, right? Okay? Then comes chapter 6. The expansion of evil to the point that God regrets making human beings. The Lord was so sorry he had ever put them on the earth. His heart was broken because their thoughts were always going towards evil and those types of intentions. That was followed by a cataclysmic event, a mass casualty event that didn't fix the problem. Okay? And then in chapter 11, the people began to collectively engage in societal and structural disobedience to God, okay, which resulted in God dividing and scattering them over the whole earth, and we live with those divisions to this day. Those first 11 chapters describe so much that we experience in life. And with all that going on, it didn't seem like God was serious about his promise, okay? Fulfilling his promise, but he was. And he was going to go to great lengths to fulfill this promise that this child was going to come into the world, okay? But he had to decide, think about this, he had to decide how to orchestrate it and how this was going to work. What kind of racial and cultural identity was the kid going to have, okay? What was family tree would he be born into? This is all practical considerations, okay? When would this happen? Who would be the mother, okay? Where would this birth take place? And so the story of Abraham, which starts in chapter 12, is critical in understanding the answers to these questions. Don't worry, we're going to speed it up, okay, a little bit. We're only in chapter 12, but Abraham's really the tangible beginning of all that God wants to do to fulfill this promise to defeat the evil, the downward spiral that's in the world, okay? And weirdly, the Christmas story, as we know it, begins with a mysterious pregnancy of an unwed teenage girl, okay? Well, the backstory involves an older couple that has struggled with infertility their whole marriage. So 2,000 years before the Christmas event happened, God said this to this guy. He said this, leave your country, leave your people, okay? Leave your father's household, everything that you know, all that gives you security in life. I'm asking you to walk away from it. Where are you going to go? To the place that I'm going to show you. Go tell your wife, we're packing it up, we're moving, where we're going. It's going to be like the pink flamingo you turn left at, okay? You're going to know it when you see it, okay? That's where you're going. And we don't know why he chose Abram and Abraham, but his instructions was, listen, you have a good life here and stuff, but I need you to leave. I need you to leave all that. Leave all your support. Leave behind all that's familiar. I'm not going to tell you where you're going, but you'll know it when you see it. And then he gives them this promise. I'm going to make you into a great nation. A great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great. Really good things are going to happen to you. And then you will be a blessing. People will be blessed. As a matter of fact, all the nations on earth are going to be blessed through you. And this great nation is going to bless all the other nations that are going to come from you. This guy doesn't even have a kid. And he's old. And they're beyond childbearing years. He's like, I'm going to make a great nation for my descendants. How about just giving me a kid? You know, and so it's this amazing thing. And it's a really strange promise that his nation is going to bless all the other nations, because in the ancient world and in today, nations don't generally bless each other. In the ancient world, what did they do? They conquered each other. They pillaged each other. They enslaved each other. They didn't bring benefit to each other. They did all the bad stuff to each other. And well, why did he make all these promises? Well, it ties back to Genesis 3:15. Someone was going to be born from Abraham's descendants that would crush the head of the snake and eliminate the downward spiral. And it begins to reveal what the racial and cultural identity of this kid is going to be, which family tree he would come from, and where this place that he was supposed to go, where this birth would take place. And Abraham trusted God. He left. He went away. But here's the thing. You read the life of his life, he didn't always do things God's way. He was messed up just like us. Why? Because being messed up is a universal condition, right? It is. It's a universal thing, okay? And against all odds, they had a kid named Isaac. And Isaac screwed up regularly also. That's just how he was. Isaac had two boys, okay, Jacob and Esau, and they were real screw-ups, okay? You know, Jacob was this kind of mama's boy and lived in the house all the time, and Esau was a guy from the field, and they hated each other, and Esau was planning on murdering Jacob as soon as their dad died, okay? Did you grow up in a dysfunctional family? I'm not looking for a raise of hands, okay? Okay. This was dysfunction with a capital D, okay? I mean, these guys just had dysfunctional families all over the place. And it didn't seem like this promise that he made to Abraham was going to be fulfilled, okay? I mean, how are people like this going to become a great nation? They're going to possess, great names, and they're going to be a blessing to other people when their lives were just a train wreck. Well, Jacob had 12 sons, okay? And most of these guys, particularly 10 of them, were just jerks. I mean, they were wild. They were immoral. And Joseph was the youngest, and he was Daddy's favorite. And so Dad spoiled him. You may have heard of his fancy coat, And he was also a tattletale, okay? If there's anything, I have brothers. If there's anything brothers don't like, is a brother who's a tattletale, right? And he was always narking on his brothers, all the stuff that they did, and it drove the boys so crazy that 10 of them decided to kill him by throwing him in a well. Okay? And then they changed the plan because they said, well, why don't we make some money off of them? And so they saw some trade slavers going by, and so they decided, why just kill them? Let's sell them to these guys, and we can get some money for them. Okay? And so they did that, Joseph got taken to Egypt, okay? And then the brothers took his fancy coat, soaked it in goat blood, okay? Took it back to dear old dad and said, hey, sorry, Pops, the golden boy got killed, been eaten by a wild animal. Dad cried and the boys went out to play. Okay? That's just what happened, okay? This family is going to be a blessing, okay? This is the foundation for a great nation. You know, these guys were going to be, through these guys, all the nations of the earth, all the people in the earth were going to be blessed. Give me a break. It doesn't look like it. I agree with me? Okay? Well, against all odds, Joseph lived and gained political and position and power under Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord blessed him there. There was a great famine that happened, and through a crazy series of events, the nation was preserved by Joseph. However, the cost of their preservation was enslavement. They became slaves, okay? And what the 10 brothers intended for evil, when they did that to Joseph, God ended up using it for good in preserving everybody, okay? They got reunited in Egypt, and the descendants of the 12 boys became the social structure of their society, and they formed the 12 tribes of Israel, okay? Israel had a national identity at this point. They had no territory. In fact, they were enslaved in Egypt, okay? This is the foundation of a great nation? Really? These guys are going to bless the whole earth through these guys, you know? It didn't seem like it. How could a landless tribe of slaves bring benefit to the nations? Well, then God raised up Moses. You know what Moses' big crime was? He was a murderer. Did you know that about Moses? But through Moses, the nation escaped from Egypt. They had nowhere to go, and so they wandered around in the desert, you know, and there's a big story behind that. But during this time, rules and laws were established to regulate societal and religious behaviors for the nation. And eventually they attacked the ancestral lands of the Canaanites and conquered it. It was bloody, it was difficult, but they did gain eventually a national homeland. But they weren't a blessing to the nations. They went to war with the nations. They went to war with everybody that was surrounding them, okay? And they were acting just like all the other nations. They were conquering each other. They were pillaging each other, okay? They didn't benefit the other nations at all. However, through all these long years and all this drama, God kept trickling into the narrative the promise that he had made. He kept saying, I have a plan for you, a plan for everybody, for all the nations. But most of the time, they weren't on board with that program. You see, the Hebrew Scriptures, what they do is they describe how God is working through history to restore his creation, to bring it to its original pristine state, okay? And the overarching story of the Older Testament is the description of how God formed the nation of Israel and from Abraham's heirs, and it details the way he provided for the nation a strong religious and cultural identity as well as a robust legal and societal and governmental system, okay? And it also recounts how much trouble God went through to give them a national homeland. And this is the thing you can't miss. He did all of that to create the context in which the promised baby was going to be born, was going to live, and was going to die. And the counterpoint to the whole story is the rebellious nature of the people, okay? He didn't want them to be like the other nations, but they wanted to be like the other nations. They wanted a human king. He wanted to be their king. And they wanted a human king just like everybody else. So eventually he gave them that. And they had some good kings. Saul was okay. David was pretty good. He was also a murderer. And then you got Solomon, okay, who ended up going into apostasy at the end of his life. But eventually the nation dissolved and separated into a northern and southern kingdom and dissolved into apostasy and division, okay? And their continued waywardness resulted in divinely orchestrated consequences. In 721 BC, God allowed the Assyrian Empire to conquer and permanently remove the 10 tribes from the northern kingdom. And the people in the land of the north were assimilated in the surrounding culture. Basically, the 10 tribes, you've heard of the lost tribes of Israel? Okay, the 10 northern kingdom tribes were thrown in the dustbin of history. They were gone. Okay? Then you had two tribes down in the bottom still existing. But these were the people that God was going to form this great nation that was going to bless all the other nations. It didn't seem like it. Okay? Then in 606 BC, the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin, okay, they got removed by the Babylonians, but temporarily. Okay? But it didn't seem like any of this was going to happen. Okay? And over time, the Persian Empire took over, and they had a different policy towards conquered people, and they allowed them to return to the land and get back to their homelands. And this policy released the southern kingdom back to Judah and all that. And all this time, during all this time, God kept raising up prophets. And the prophets, most of the time, the prophets spoke into the current events, the attitudes, the perspectives the people had that were wrong. Most of the time, a prophetic word is not about the future. It's about what you're doing right now and trying to help you get straightened out. And most of their messaging was that. But then sprinkled in those messages were reminders of God's intention to make them into a great nation. Okay, and that through them, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. But humanly speaking, it didn't make much sense. Didn't make much sense. They were fractured. The 10 tribes were gone, okay? The nation was weak, okay? And then they were conquered by the Greeks. The Greeks came along, and what they did was, it didn't last for a long time, but what happened was, you've heard the idea of lingua franca, like a universal language? The Greek language became the universal language of trade and scholarship as a result of that, okay? Then came the Romans. They came along, and Rome was thought to be the eternal kingdom, okay? And the Roman Empire created a kind of peace and unity known to history as Pax Romana, a 200-year period where there was relative peace, order, prosperity, and stability, because if anybody screwed up, they would just crush them. And so everybody kind of obeyed for quite a long time. And during this time, there were still Jews that believed in the greatness of their destiny of their nation, but a lot of them weren't sure, because it sure didn't look like they were very great, okay? Most Jews held to an Israel first idea, okay? A lot of them did. But they had forgotten that they were supposed to be a blessing to the nations, that it wasn't just all about them. And some Jews believed that their God was the universal, great, and only God. But frankly, it didn't seem that way. Because Israel, a great nation, they were dominated by great nations. First by the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Israel's going to be a blessing to the nations? They were hardly in a position to do that, okay? Nor did they desire to, frankly. And so by the time of the Roman occupation, it had been thousands of years since God had said, I'm going to put hatred between you and the woman, okay? Between your offspring and her offspring. But it was during the Roman occupation that it happened. There was a young woman, okay, that had this mysterious pregnancy. She was really a teenage girl, okay? She was engaged to be married, okay? But all of a sudden, there was all kinds of crazy stuff. Do you remember all the stuff about it? Okay? All of a sudden, here's this girl, and she knows she's carrying this special baby. And this idea, the idea is, and here's Christmas, that after thousands of years, okay, through Israel never looked like they were going to be that nation. Never. Okay? Why did they get picked? We don't know. But they were just like us, screw-ups, just like us, okay? But through Mary's offspring, the birth finally happened. The one who was going to crush the snake's head, give it a fatal blow, okay? And even though the snake struck his heel, gave him a non-fatal injury. 2,000 years after the Lord made his promise to Abraham of greatness, blessing, and being a blessing, God said, everything's perfectly set up. Now is the time. Now is the time. And the Apostle Paul described it that way in the 4th chapter of the book of Galatians. He said this, when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman. When the timing was perfect, God sent his son. Why was the timing perfect? Well, there was a universal language that was spoken throughout the Roman kingdom. The Greeks had come and established that. The Romans had unified the known world, and borders could be crossed to deliver this news that this child had come. Rome had built roads, okay? Transportation was easier than ever to get around for the messengers to deliver this message. The economy was interwoven, okay? And could be capitalized to spread the good news because trade was happening across borders. God used the Roman form of execution, crucifixion, to facilitate the snake strike on the heel of the one who was going to deliver the world and destroy the downward spiral. And God used the resurrection of the Christmas child to prove that he had crushed the head of the snake, giving it a fatal blow. He defeated death. He defeated sin, the sin that was committed against him and the sins that we commit. Through his unrighteous death, he took the penalty that we deserved upon himself, and through his resurrection, he proved that forgiveness is guaranteed, that we too will survive our physical death. And all of that happened at his first coming. And all through this history, it proved that the kingdoms of this world don't last. They don't last, guys. How do we think we're going to be an exception to that? They don't last, okay? When Rome was over them, it seemed like it was going to go on forever. 200 years. They were dominating the world. Didn't last, okay? And at his second coming, what's going to happen is he's going to prove that his kingdom is eternal. Did you follow all that? Okay. I don't know how many pages that is. Okay. But here's the thing. From one point of view, you can say, and it's legit, you could say Jesus is the reason for the season. That's why we celebrate, okay? But the motivating thing behind that was us. Was us. If history proves anything, what it proves is that we can't fix ourselves, okay? We think it's going to happen because, oh yeah, that person got in office or that law passed or something like that. Have you watched how this works? Okay? And the other thing is we can't regulate ourselves out of it. We can't educate ourselves out of it. We can't use technology to get ourselves out of it. Technology extends our life, but it doesn't save us. Father, we thank you that you went through all this trouble for us. From our point of view, Lord, you are the reason for the season. But we thank you that from your point of view, we are the reason that you came, Jesus. Thank you for making us your reason. Help us to connect with that this holiday season in a fresh, new, and invigorating way. Lord, you have blessed us, and you bless us for our own benefit, but we thank you that you also tell us and give us the privilege not only of being blessed, but of being a blessing too. Give us each and every one of us, Lord, an opportunity to bring benefit into someone else's life in these coming days. It's in your name we pray and for your sake. Amen. During this next song, if you